in so doing, talking about why I think the games industry is such a wonderful industry, and it's so often not seen as a viable career option for children by their parents, or not seen as an investable industry by the people who hold the purse strings. But it's a wonderfully creative industry, and it plays to the strengths of the UK in terms of our inherent brilliance at creativity. Look at our music, our fashion, our film, our design, our architecture, our publishing, and of course our games industry, matched with our inherent knowledge of high technology, fusing art and science together to create wonderful digital content to serve to global audiences around the world. So it's a fantastic opportunity, the games industry. I've been in it from the beginning, and I'm going to now talk a little bit and try and entertain you about why and how I got into it. So these are not my children, of course, but these are, when we enter this world, we interact, we learn through play, and I think we're playful by nature. So much of our learning is done by problem solving, which is exactly what games are. And often we became kind of worried to say we actually play games, but I think it's a wonderful thing. And how I got into it, I was used to play games as a pastime, and in 1975 started a company called Games Workshop. The really handsome guy holding the magazines and wearing the glasses, that's me. We'd started with two old school friends, Steve Jackson and John Peake. And we started this company called Games Workshop. Who's heard of Games Workshop before? Fantastic. This is going to be a lot easier than I thought. Wonderful. So we started doing other things like everybody else was doing, creating traditional board games, worry boards, but we weren't really following our hearts, making games that we actually wanted to play. We were fulfilling what we thought was a need. So we thought we'd reach out to everybody we knew in games, and we published this full-color glossy magazine that you see here, Owl and Weasel. Printed 200 copies, and one of the recipients of Owl and Weasel was this man, Gary Gygax, who lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Now, Gary had just invented this game called Dungeons and Dragons. I presume those of you who've heard of Games Workshop also know about D&D, as it was affectionately known. It didn't look very much, very abstract, but it opened a whole world of imagination, one of role-playing, where you take the role of a hero or wizard, and you go on these extraordinary adventures of the mind, killing monsters and finding treasure. And it introduced the whole concept of interactive role-playing, which became so much more important as the years went on. So we devoted issue 6 of Owl and Weasel to D&D. We went over to the States to sign up with fledgling companies. Just for historical importance, the people, starting from the left here, is Fritz Leiber, famous science fiction author, followed by Gary Gygax, Professor Bach, who invented Empire of the Battle Throne. That's me holding the boxes. Rob Kuntz, who designed some of the D&D manuals, and Steve, my business partner, at the front, looking a bit grumpy. The worrying thing about this photograph is the first 3 guys in front of me are all dead, and I'm kind of next in line. So at least, well, you know, we're still here. So we also got to see Miss Wisconsin 1976. I don't know what she's doing today. I'm here in Bristol, enjoying myself, talking to you. So we came back, sold it, little trade shows around the country, and we had to rely on our ability to reach out to audiences that didn't exist. So we were operating out of our flat in Shepherd's Bush, top floor of a 3rd floor flat, and used to see people milling around on the streets below with their catalogue, looking for this Games Workshop shop. Of course, there wasn't one. And we used to open the window, "You want Games Workshop? Up here, mate." So we used to get a lot of telephone sales, but we didn't have, of course, mobile phones that weren't invented. We didn't even have a phone in our own flat, but there was a payphone on the ground floor. And our landlord used to share this phone. The phone would always be an order for Dungeons and Dragons. So we raced down the stairs, always too late. Paddy was there first. "Hello. You want a Games Workshop, do you? You can go to hell." And he'd hang up, and we understood the value of public relations very early on. So he ended up kicking us out of our flat because there was just too much commotion for his liking. And we were faced with a decision whether to find somewhere to live or find an office. So you go to the friendly bank manager. This, again, is not our bank manager, somebody off the internet, who I thought could be a bank manager. And you go into them. And not really different it is today. You go into the bank manager and say, got this great game, it's a role-playing game, you kill monsters, you find treasure, will you lend me some money? And he looks at you rather like an Alsatian watching television and urges you out the door. And there was no understanding about games then. There's even less understanding today in some ways because games are now digital. So to get people to invest in games is quite challenging. So we got an office, and we had to live in a van for 4 months, but we didn't mind because it was our passion. And when you're following your dreams, it's better to do something that you're doing and earning nothing, but enjoying yourself, than being paid a little bit more and not being happy, as far as I'm concerned. Not everybody's choice, but that's how we were. So we started a new magazine, White Dwarf magazine, and we opened our very first retail store in Hammersmith in 1978, largely because we couldn't get other retailers to stock Dungeons & Dragons because it was such a specialist product. I'm hoping one day I'm going to find somebody who was actually in that queue. If you were there, just put your hand up, we'll go out for a beer afterwards. Of course, Games Workshop has changed, become a lot more professional these days. This is no longer a Games Workshop retail outlet. It's now the Bosnia and Herzegovina Community Advice Center. But I guess times move on. So here's our first shop, and this is me putting White Dwarf together in 1978. And here's some of our retail outlets as Games Workshop evolved. Clearly, we knew nothing about retailing. We were making it up as we went along, because anything we got, we just shoved it straight in the window and hoped for the best. Here's some of our fashionable sales staff at the time, and Workshop grew. And then we opened our miniatures figures factory, so you could represent yourselves in the role-playing games, and these were some of the very first miniatures that we ever produced. It was quite a complicated process involving two-part molds of vulcanized rubber, which you, under heat and pressure and centrifugal force, would create these wonderful metal miniatures. And then we had to make a choice, because in 1978, that's when Dungeons & Dragons as our exclusive license ran out, and TSR, Gary Gygax, wanted to merge TSR and Games Workshop, and Steve and I, being violently independent young Brits, said no to the merger. And we suddenly realized that we had to replace Dungeons & Dragons because it was no longer ours. And what I say to a lot of young guys and girls starting off their games companies today is that if you want to create real value in your company and really determine your own destiny, you have to create your own intellectual property. More importantly, you have to retain ownership of your intellectual property. So often is the case that we trade it away for project finance, and as other people see greater value in what we produce than we do ourselves. So just as a little advice, I would say that if you can get finance without having to trade away your IP, it's absolutely brilliant, because you can build a brand, a franchise, and you get your revenues from the content itself, plus all the incremental revenues from merchandising and licenses. So Warhammer was developed by 3 of our guys at Workshop, and it became a major franchise for Workshop, mainly to sell all these miniature figures that people used to paint and fight battles. So Warhammer 40K became an even bigger franchise, and it's now pretty pervasive around the games world. So we moved from metal miniatures to plastic figures because they were easier to paint, cheaper to make, easier to ship, and there was no dangers to health, of course, in any way. Now, Workshop is very professional, 300 stores. I'm no longer associated with the company, but it's a publicly quoted company doing very well. White Dwarf, 250,000 copies a month sold. So well done, Workshop. They've carried on the vision, which is brilliant. Steve and I wanted to take role-playing to a wider audience. So back in 1982, we wrote the very first interactive game book. Anyone ever read one of these interactive books out there? Fantastic. For those who don't know, this is gamification of literature, they're now calling it. It's a book in which you are the hero. It's not a book in where you're passively reading about somebody else's adventures. You have to make the choices as the adventure is your own. So it's also been referred to as analog hypertext, in that at the end of each paragraph you have to make a decision. Turn left, turn right. If you don't find a key in one room, you won't be able to open a room later on. So these were very much involving of children of the time in the 1980s. So there were such titles as Forest of Doom. We commissioned the art ourselves because we wanted to have art that actually threatened to rip the heads off the readers rather than the artists that the publishers at the time wanted to employ, which were nice, kind of safe little gnomes sitting on toadstools. So we won that battle. And so some of the big titles, Death Trap Dungeon and House of Hell. So the net result, 17 million copies of Warlock, of Fighting Fantasy were sold around the world in 30 languages. They're still being licensed today. New editions have been issued recently in China. And when we didn't actually maintain control of the art direction, we allowed local territories to put their own covers on because they said they knew better. We tended to disagree with their choice. So I'll just show you now the cover for Death Trap Dungeon of the Japanese version, and you can make your own mind up. Well, there we are. And so that was the series. And we all need a little lift in life, and we had public relations, not paid for, but we would like to congratulate the Evangelical Society, who published an 8-page warning guide about Fighting Fantasy, saying that you're going to interact with devils and demons, it's going to be terrible. And also the bored housewife in deepest suburbia, who phoned in one day saying that having read one of my books, her child levitated. So for £1.25, everyone thought they could fly, so they started buying it in great numbers, which is thank you. So it was a 30th anniversary last year. I wrote a new one to celebrate the event, Blood of the Zombies. A great quote here. Blood of the Zombies is awesome. My friend Shane doesn't like it, but that's because it's really hard and Shane is done. So there we are. That's the analog world. So what I'm trying to work my way towards is that I had the skills in the analog world to make content. In the digital world, I don't have programming skills. I can't program. I wish I could. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the video games industry, and lastly, talk about the skills required to be in the industry from a creative and computing point of view. So Blood of the Zombies and other Fighting Fantasy books that are available on iPad. But if you think about the games industry, where it came from, I entered myself in 1984 by designing the first game for Domok, a small British developer just starting off life. And Domok, I joined the company after selling out of Workshop, and oversaw a merger which created Eidos, the home of Lara Croft. Eidos in turn was acquired 3 years ago by Square Enix of Japan, and so it's a global developer publisher. But the games industry itself really started as a simulation in a laboratory by Steve Russell in 1961, two warring spaceships with limited fuel and weaponry, but it was never commercialized. It wasn't until Nolan Bushnell launched Pong back in 1972 that commercialization of games took place. Now, this was a very important game for many ways, for many reasons. One, it showed the importance of gameplay. This one didn't sell because of its graphics or because of its technology particularly. It sold because of that little magic fairy dust that makes you want to come back and play. Plus, it was a two-player game, so you were playing with someone. It was that social element. And you can learn it in 10 seconds. Avoid missing ball for high score, and you could learn how to play. Games entered the homes in 1972 with the release of the Magnavox Odyssey. Magnavox implied that you needed a Magnavox TV, which was a marketing hole in the foot because you didn't, and people didn't want to buy it. It was down to Atari with their 2600 that suddenly had a games console with interchangeable cartridges as multiplayer, and suddenly 40% of the United States population were playing games in the home. The Japanese entered the markets in the late 70s, dominating the arcades in particular with games like Space Invaders. There was actually a shortage of 100 yen coins in Tokyo in the late 70s because they were all stuck in these arcade machines, and they had to do an emergency mint of 100 yen coins. So I'm going to take you, while I have a glass of water, a little pictorial journey of some of the early games, starting with Pong. So games entered the homes in the UK in particular in the console era in 1995 with the launch of the PlayStation. Software sells hardware, and Tomb Raider was one of the titles that helped drive the success of the PlayStation. But of course today there's a multitude of games-enabled platforms that people play games with anywhere, anytime. And there's new hardware being announced all the time. It's incredible that Kickstarter-funded hardware is appearing. Virtual reality with Oculus Rift gave a really amazing 3D experience of playing games with its wrapped around your head. It's an incredible experience that's launching very soon. And of course, next gen, the announcements from Microsoft and Sony PlayStation about their new console hardware, which produces amazing cinematic, interactive Hollywood experiences that people immerse themselves with. So the game industry is big. It's bigger than DVDs, bigger than box office, bigger than music, bigger than books. And we currently spend $50 billion on software sales alone. And people wonder why is that? Because we're very good at creating emotional responses in people now, where they make them laugh, make them cry, make them happy, make them sad. And it's going to rise to $90 billion by 2015. So this is an extraordinary growth market and an opportunity to the UK population in particular, given our heritage at making games. So there's now content diversity. It's no longer guys making games for guys, although that was the starting point, and it's great to see more women and ethnic diversity in the creation of games to create content for everybody to play and enjoy games, which is great. So there's traditional blockbuster titles are still available on consoles. Often there's been a sort of misrepresentation, to my mind, of games in some of the general media. Too often games are criticized, just one or two titles that are 18 rated for a reason, seen as people think it's the only type of games that are available. They never stop to talk about the positives of games, that you're solving puzzles and problems, intuitive learning, choice and consequence, and social aspects, and even dexterity. They're a good thing for games-based learning and problem solving. And we have a robust rating system in PEGI, a pan-European rating system that advises parents and guardians of what is suitable for their children to play or not. So we also welcome more parental involvement in what their children are deemed to be allowed to play, in the same way they would with cinematic products. So there's been a sort of negativity surrounding game for a long time, but I think those opinions are changing now as people understand the value of games. And you can use games to teach mathematics in particular, because it's relevant to children's lives, it's in context, it's not an abstract learning of mathematics. So often, I can't do calculus, and I can't do simultaneous equations because everything was in the abstract. Learning abstract facts by rote, for me, was impossible. But if it's in context, you can really learn and remember that learning. So you can use games as a training tool, whether it's the armed forces or training surgeons and pilots. Games technology is pervasive and very useful in this way. And you can also gift through games. This is a small company that I chair. It allows you to make, when you're making in-app purchases in a game, you can gift through their API some of the revenue derived from that microtransaction to a real-world cause somewhere around the world. So, for example, if you can buy a can in a game, one part of the world will get a real can in their world. So you can, through the virtual worlds, make real value propositions to people in the real world. And of course, games enable creativity. If you watch a child playing Microsoft, which is effectively user-generated content, it helps them construct objects, share it with their friends, and they get a real positive sense of design and creativity. And games, President Obama recently cited Mark Zuckerberg's interesting games that got him interested in coding, and the output of coding, of course, was Facebook. So it's very contextual for kids to learn and be inspired to create content. So I hope we could think more positively about the games industry, that it is a good thing in the main, and worry less about the bad bits. BAFTA celebrates the art form, and you never know, one day we might get a headline like this. Perhaps not in my lifetime. So we've moved from a niche to a mainstream audience. Children play, young people play, old people like me still play, everyone's playing games. And there's tremendous, when a new blockbuster title is launched, it generates incredible amounts of revenue. 6.5 million copies sold of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, generating $400 million in a day in the USA and the United Kingdom. But the video games industry is in a constant state of change. It's moving now from a box product sold at retail to a digital service, which you consume online. And once you've gone digital, there is absolutely no going back. And we just reached a tipping point where sales from online has now surpassed those of packaged goods sold at retail. And there's all these amazing digital platforms to serve content. So there's a sort of golden age, a second golden age of creativity in games now, was the indies, the small agile teams serving original content in their own creative way, discovering new ways of playing. And it's great to see that sort of original creativity being served all around the world. So there's hundreds of millions of new players of games today, massive multiplayer online games like Club Penguin, Moshi Monsters from Mind Candy, a great British success story, a wonderful game involving education aspects to their role-playing adventures online. World of Warcraft, what would that have been without Dungeons & Dragons all those years ago? Casual games, free-to-play games which are monetized through advertising, and online games, as I said, like Minecraft. And Facebook's become a games platform. It didn't exist a few years ago, and now there's hundreds of millions of people playing games like Farmville and Village Life. And of course, smartphones has become a platform of choice for people, connected people on the move anywhere. You just don't have to look people on buses and transport playing games all the time, and actually, you know, happy to play games and not have feeling they have to do it in some dark room somewhere. But the reason why games have exploded in their use is that console games were still a niche activity because it required a certain amount of manual dexterity and knowledge to operate the controller itself. And people didn't want to feel that they were stupid in any way, so they tended not to play those games. But Apple really nailed the user interface, simple swipe technology, and you could play games like Angry Birds. So that's enabled a whole new raft of games players around the world enjoying casual games on smartphones and devices. The opportunities are incredible. If you look at what's going to happen by 2017, there's going to be 1 billion new handsets or smartphones sold. These are all games platforms. So it's important that we really drive the games industry and support it any way we can, because we're very good at making games, and this is a wonderful way to help drive the digital economy. Free to play, I won't go into the business models too much other than to say monetizing of content inside free to play games is where the whole space is going on that device. Just to think a little bit about Android issues versus iOS. iOS is seen as a development platform of choice because there's only one app store, iOS app store, versus 40 Android app stores, and the compatibility issues between the various Android-driven phones is also an issue, and there's also a piracy issue on Android, which is not great. But there's been 1.7 billion downloads of Angry Birds, but for every Angry Birds, there's probably about 10,000 dead birds, and the challenge for small developers is how are they going to be discovered, how are they going to be seen, what about my game, who's going to find out about it? And so using social connections by friend recommendations like Words with Friends, so you can reach out to your friends and invite them to play. Free-to-play games like Clash of Clans doing amazing well. Who's played Candy Crush Saga on their smartphones? Yes, you're not alone. There's been 1 trillion candies crushed since it was launched. And there's a new emerging market leaders in driving the digital space. But for me, content is king. We create some incredible intellectual property, but when we're making the game, we all have to consider that Zen flow through the game, so games are not too difficult and not too hard. And if you can tap into some sort of childhood memory, you're likely to resonate with the player and make a wonderful gaming experience for them. So, in summary, games move from premium to freemium, from a high price of a game to a free game, and it's all about acquisition, retention, and monetization of users. Using analytics to find what users like and what they don't like, and creating new ways of playing games. So we've moved from the 70s to a point where creating wonderful intellectual property. And one lady I've been associated with since she was released in the world was Lara Croft. Now, a lot of people have claimed to have created Lara Croft, and technology has allowed it to look more realistic over time, but it was actually Toby Gard who did the original concept drawing for Lara. Now, Toby had been tasked with creating a character for a game which was called Rick Dangerous. Now, Rick was a PC game, and as the industry got more in tune with acknowledging copyright, it was thought it was quite sensible when Rick was going to be put onto the new PlayStations that he might adopt a different look, because he had a certain similarity to a film star whose name I've forgotten. And so everyone thought this was a Tomb Raiding style game. Everyone thought that Toby was going to create another male character. But he'd seen Tangirl, the rise of girl power, and then a cherry. And his first drawing was this, as a woman. And everyone thought he was mad and called him Lara Croft. So as people warmed to the idea of a female main lead character, thought that Cruz didn't sound particularly British, so someone went through a phone book and came up with the name Croft. And here's a manga-style drawing of the early Lara Croft till the first render. And here's Lara in 1996, released. So I'll take you on a little pictorial journey of Lara from her release in 1996 as she moved through various iterations, as she went through her life on PlayStation 1 and then to PlayStation 2. Sadly, we had to move the production of Tomb Raider from Core Design, our company-owned studio in Derby, to Crystal Dynamics in California, our other company-owned studio, because Core failed to meet the demands of the technology inside PlayStation 2. So there, Lara has remained ever since. And as you can see, over time, the graphic fidelity improves as the horsepower of the machines rises. So there's been over 30 million copies of Tomb Raider sold now. She's still one of the most famous icons in gaming. In a Times Digital survey a number of years ago, in terms of recognition, she scored higher than the Pope. So she became a pop culture phenomenon, graced the covers of lifestyle magazines as well as games magazines. And she's had parody in Mad Magazine, survived notoriety when the famous Nude Raider with Mel McAndrew. There's even been Tom Raider spoofs out there, but so she survived all that like any strong franchise. And of course, people wanted to see the real Lara Croft. We wanted to see actually meet the real Lara Croft. So we decided we'd hire some girls to play the role of Lara. First of all, at a trade show when we launched Lara Croft, and this is the very first. I don't know why we went for 3, but I don't know. It's one of those things you do. Rather than having one Lara Croft, we had 3. Now, the first girl, Natalie Cook, she became Lara for the first year. The girl at the far end, I have no idea what happened to her. The girl in the middle played the role of Lara for the trade show for the weekend. Went on to have a rather a career of notoriety. Anyone know who she is? Correct, sir. That's the young Katie Price, aged about 18. And she went on to be Jordan, and now she's Katie Price again, full circle. So we had Natalie Cook, Rona Mitra, who went on to have a very famous film career. And another thing I say when I talk to games developers starting off in life, I say always do what you're good at. Never do stuff that you think you're good at. Always just concentrate on what you do. So we made games. We were pretty good at making games. We didn't make records, but we thought we could. So we hired Dave Stewart, the Rhythmics, to write a song, because we were going to release an album, a Tomb Raider album. And I think you learn from your mistakes. Often we're pilloried for our errors in this country, but it is a learning process. It's success, work in progress. So I'm going to share with you now the Tomb Raider song that we released. We released it as test marketing in France and thought, not too sure about this, so we quietly forgot about it. But there's a little room on stage, so if you feel compelled to want to dance, please choose a partner whilst you enjoy the full-on song of Tomb Raider sung by Rona Mitra. get the idea. Then we had Nell McAndrew, who went on to have a rather famous career in the popular press and TV, and a succession of girls. Every year we had a new one. Here's Old Bloke with Lara, Old Bloke with a few Laras, Old Bloke at Lara reunion party. So every time we had a new Lara Croft, we got an amazing amount of publicity because everyone to have been in touch with Lara Croft. And some anecdotes here. David James was the goalkeeper for Liverpool and England at the time. He let in 4 really sloppy goals, and the whole back page of the Times was devoted to him saying he'd spent the whole night previously playing Tomb Raider. Prodigy were a year late delivering their album. They said they'd spent the whole year playing Tomb Raider. And again, when I talk to developers about the power of intellectual property, if you retain ownership, not only do you get the revenues from publishing the game yourself, you also get all the incremental revenues from licensing and merchandising. And all these companies are well known in their own right, wanted to use Lara Croft to help boost their own sales, which is good for 2 reasons. One, they gave us money, and second, they were promoting Lara Croft as well at the same time. Lucozade were one of the first. They changed the name of their drink from Lucozade to Larazade for a period of 3 months. With a very successful campaign that year added, I think, 10% year-on-year sales of their fizzy drink. So I'm going to show you a couple of their ads. Got a bit of social history here. And then they used actors. And then they had a hybrid of live action and animation.
Oh, Lucozade. Thanks, lovely. Oh. Spartacus, Boris. I'll give you woof.
And then our friends in France used Lara to promote Seat cars.
Sélection.
Cordoba Vario. Arosa. Ibiza.
Sauvegarder maintenant.
Non.
Sûr?
Oui. Alhambra. Montez, j'ai peur toute seule. C'est hâte, vous êtes loin d'avoir tout vu.
I'll just show one more because Visa used Lara Croft in parts of Asia. Ooh. And of course, she didn't go unnoticed by Hollywood. Now, Hollywood had traditionally created their own characters or looked to literature or comics, and now they saw the compelling nature of video games characters, how people really immerse themselves. And so more and more games were looked at by Hollywood. And when we met with Larry Gordon Associates, who were representing Paramount Pictures, we managed to negotiate an executive producer role because we didn't want Lara Croft being taken in a way where we didn't want her to go. So when they suggested Angelina Jolie play the role of Lara Croft, we said, that's absolutely fine with us, no problem, you go ahead. And yeah, I got to meet her a couple of times on the set at Pinewood. I'm still recovering from that, so there we are. So the film itself generated about $500 million at box office, another $100 million in DVD and video sales. And there's been Tomb Raider rides. There's a Lara Croft Way now in Derby. And of course, people wanted merchandise, but we didn't want to overexploit the market in any way. We just wanted one or two select items, so not to be seen to be in any way exploiting. So just one or two things, so we didn't flood the market and oversaturate it in any way. So there we are. That's our IP. So you create an IP, you create a brand, a franchise, and you do licensing. And you know, we're so good at creating content in this country, and it's my advice to everybody out there is to always to hang on to it if you can. So Tomb Raider, a new one came out earlier this year. It was about the young Lara Croft. It was a survival prequel to the previous games, and it's an origin story. And it's I'm not going to have time to show you the contents of it. I'd just like to really talk about something a little bit more serious now. Is that we should embrace our creativity in this country and support the creative industry in particular as being a real driving force of the UK economy, particularly the digital economy. And to my mind, you need I call my 5P to support not just the games industry, but for all creative industries. We have to sort of raise the profile of the industries, improve the perception within government, within the civil service, within the media, to see it as a real powerhouse of creativity, digital manufacturing driving the digital future of the UK. We have to ensure that we have, by P for pipes, I mean a high-speed broadband that's available to all, not just for downloading, but for uploading content. It's all very well to have HS2, so we can connect people from Birmingham to London, but I want people to be able to be connected in a digital sense all over this country. For their own consumption of content, but for also to allow them to serve content to global audiences. For P, for property, I mean intellectual property, to make sure we retain ownership of it, not trade it away for project finance, as I said earlier. Fourth P is for pounds, i.e. access to finance, to make sure by raising the profile of the industry that we're an investable industry, that the traditional gatekeepers of finance see us as an industry that is not as risky as they might think. There's a wonderful returns. Clash of Clans, I showed you earlier, a slide. This is a free-to-play game. A small studio in Finland is generating nearly $3 million a day in revenue. And that from a studio no bigger than 100 people. So it's not the size of the studio, it's the monetization of their content. So these are extraordinary, important industries. And last but not least is people. We need a skilled workforce to be able to create the content to empower our naturally creative nation. And so I chair and have done for the last 7 years, the Computer Games Skills Council for creative skill sets. And I was saddened by the number of universities that we'd only managed to accredit 10 of them out of 144 serving games within their title. So many of these courses were generalists, so you're learning about the social relevance of Grand Theft Auto and a little bit about games design, but we're not giving them the hard skills to make games, i.e. coding and art and animation. So we had all this rise of studios. We got off to a flying start in the games industry, and yet we dropped by 2008 down from third to sixth in the global league of games development, despite us generating £2 billion of revenue to UK PLC. The problem was there simply weren't enough computer programs of a high enough caliber for us to employ. So being a northerner of birth, I used to whinge a lot, and so talking about people were able to play Angry Birds but weren't able to make it. So who are you going to call? Well, I called Ed Vasey, who's been a great supporter of the games industry in particular, and of course the creative industries. And he managed to persuade Nesta to fund a report that we wrote called Next Gen, and also Nesta published the report and supplied us with 2 full-time researchers. And I'm very proud of the report we created called Next Gen, and if you want to download it, go to nesta.org.uk. And we looked at, started off working with Alex Hope to look at the visual effects industries and the games industry. And we realized it was so much more than that. It wasn't just about games or, in fact, entertainment or creative industries. It was about enabling digital creativity for all, to help people, children in particular, understand the digital world in which they live and to be able to direct technology rather than being simply passive users of it. So there's a book called by Douglas Rushkoff. We're really at a crossroads now. Do we direct technology or we let ourselves be directed by it? Really the choice is up to us whether we want to be drivers or passengers in this car. And talking of which, these are skills that across everything in the world today. Computer science is at the core of everything. And so the Chevy Volt has 10 million lines of code in its of embedded software. Fly-by-wire technology is a competitive advantage for Airbus. And talking of cybercrime, World War I, World War II, WWW. Computer coders are required to be everywhere to fight cybercrime, to create content, designing a jet propulsion engine. These are transferable and essential skills to have computer science taught in the classroom. So we started off by looking at universities. The fact that the people applying to do computer science at universities was dropping off year on year by 10%, which was a worrying fact in itself. And it really harked back to the way education was delivered. And the only thing that interferes with learning is my education, as Albert Einstein said. And for us, the problem was ICT. ICT was, for too many years, has simply been a strange hybrid of office skills, requiring kids who are digital natives to spend a year learning Word, Excel, and PowerPoint and testing them at the end of that. And against all odds, managing to turn them off at devices which they're so natural to them and which they so enjoy using. We weren't giving them any inquiry to want to turn that use into making of digital content. So I did a survey with 325 children, and I asked them how many thought the ICT curriculum was boring, 72%, how many would like to learn to code, 79%, and who thought having computer science on the curriculum was a good thing, 88%, and who wanted to do art and science, 65%. So these were quite powerful numbers. So Next Gen was published. We were saying that ICT, computer science, is effectively what reading is to writing. We're teaching our children to read, but not how to write. We're making them use applications, but didn't give them any insight how to make them. And we wanted computer science to be the fourth science, because to our minds, computer science is the new Latin, because it underpins everything in the modern world. So we wanted people making and doing rather than just using. I won't show the video now, but again, you can download our Next Gen video from the Nesta website. So our main recommendation was to bring computer science in the national curriculum as essential discipline, because this was nothing new. In the 1980s, computing in schools, as the BBC Micro was a cornerstone of computing in schools, and in the home, the good old Sinclair Spectrum was an affordable, programmable computer. So we were doing stuff back then. We were creating content, but all that got lost over time as we became simple passive users. So was Next Gen going to become another dust collector? Well, not under my campaign, it wasn't. So we created, thanks to Yuki, the Games Trade Association, a campaign and got all these partners on board like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, more recently GCHQ, the Learning Societies and others, because we all had to speak to government with one voice. And even the Royal Society had published their own report saying that every child should have the opportunity to learn computers at school, including exposure to computer science as a rigorous academic discipline. But it wasn't until Eric Schmidt referenced Next Gen in his Q&A during his MacTaggart lecture in Edinburgh in 2011 that people thought this must be something important. And he said, I was flabbergasted to learn that today computer science isn't even taught as standard in UK schools. And of course, if Eric said it, it must be true. And the Prime Minister echoed his words a month later in Tech City by saying, I think Eric Schmidt is right, we're not doing enough to teach the next generation of programmers. And more recently, George Osborne said, yes, I learned BASIC at school, and suddenly it was an understanding, the penny had dropped, that it wasn't just about using technology, it had to be about creating technology. And that resulted in the radical speech by Michael Gove at BET in January 2012, and not always loved around the world for some of his policies, but for this he really has to be congratulated, because he announced at that point that the current program of study for ICT is going to be withdrawn and replaced with a curriculum that had computer science at its core. And this could be transformational, not just for our industries, but for all industries, to empower our children to understand and sort out the world through problem-based learning and computational thinking. So our recommendation number 5, to have art and computer science on the English Baccalaureate. Computer science is going to be on the EB. We're still working on the art side. And we partnered with the British Computer Society, who've been a fantastic advocate and supplied all the detail and justification to Michael Gove for his wise decision to put computer science on the national curriculum. So we've got current ICT reform, golden hellos for computer science teachers, Raspberry Pi as a tool, and fourth science being on the EBAC as an option. Clearly not everyone's going to be a computer scientist, but neither is everyone going to be a biologist, chemist either. So, reform is happening, new curriculum being introduced next year. How are we going to teach this language? Well, for me, it is a language. The earlier we can get to children learning, we can get kids coding. So, we've got CPD for teachers of current ICT, brokered by Computing at School, which is great. So we've got formal learning to satisfy DFE, rigorous, with exams, but my worry is it becomes a dry science. We can't afford to have it become not relevant to children's lives. So we start off with digital literacy. We're not going to throw out the basis of ICT because that's still a useful tool to learn digital literacy, but beyond that we must introduce computer science and information technology. As I say, my worry is that our education can often be seen as being too pure and not applied. As an academic would incline to say, that's all very well in practice, but what's it like in theory? And we've got to make sure that people understand. So I hope it's not another written exam with question number 1, who invented World Wide Web? Very interesting, a nice fact to know. You can always Google it, and it's quite important for a quiz night. But I want people to understand computing, as ICT is now going to be known as, is a verb. It's about making and doing. You show me your code and I can give you a job. If you can regurgitate a few random facts to order, I'm not so sure whether you're employable or not. So let's get it informal, trust in children's natural curiosity to learn. If teachers can't teach ICT in the short term, that should not be a problem. They can be facilitators, they can work with and learn with the children themselves. Let's trust in collaboration. Collaboration is not cheating, it's how it happens in the real world, working together. We all have different abilities and strengths. But let's have an atmosphere in which is relevant and fun to children and practical and based on real world problems to sort out the very complicated world in which our children have to exist in the future. Let's accept that we're all different and combine to create a greater product from us coming together and doing our own thing together rather than being tested as individuals. So informal learning, there's an amazing resource, whether it's YouTube or Khan Academy, for people to learn online. Let's not have it all locked away in the classroom. Get kids learning Scratch early on. From 6 years up, they can be manipulating other people's code sets. The Raspberry Pi, a wonderful device, costs less than £30, 256 meg of RAM, Linux operating system, plays iPhone standard video. For £15 million, we could give one to every child in the country. Of course, some will be thrown in the river or hit with hammers. It doesn't matter. Enough will be used in a positive way to more than justify the expense. Let's not forget art. My worry is that we're moving too much to the academic world. We need to bring reality in and combine the arts and sciences. Even whether it's architecture, you need the visual aesthetic when you're doing your design and the maths to make sure it doesn't fall down and kill you, the building you've just designed. So let's combine art and science. I come from the steam age, physical Meccano. Let's talk about digital Meccano, bringing the polymath approach to learning, like Eric Schmidt also said in his MacTaggart lecture. It's a combination of art, technology for games and everything else, whether it's designing a phone or a car. So we want art and computer science in the English baccalaureate. So it's full steam ahead, not STEM ahead for me, driving creativity and innovation through an interdisciplinary approach to art and science. And if you just want to add one little bit extra to it, if you had entrepreneurship, make it STEAM, creativity, coding, and entrepreneurship equals Mark Zuckerberg. There aren't many jobs out there, so we need to empower people to be able to start their own businesses in the home with the right skills. The traditional gatekeepers have disappeared because they can reach their audiences via high-speed broadband. Let's unlock their creativity, let's empower with some entrepreneurial skills, and let's build the digital economy in the UK. So please download NextGen. It's had over 20,000 downloads now. It's been used as a sort of poster child for the relevance of computer science in the world of education. And let's not forget the legacy of Alan Turing, a brilliant man who did brilliant things for this country. Two more Einsteins just to finish off. A person never made a mistake, never tried anything new. It's not going to be easy to implement, but we should not be afraid of failure and making mistakes. We learn and benefit from making mistakes. And lastly, for games are the most elevated form of investigation, and I agree with him. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. If there's any questions, I don't mind. I'm too old to care. I'll answer it straight. Gentleman there.
Hi there. What do you think the civil service can learn from the games industry, if anything?
The thing I say also to government, we've got three departments, BIS, DCMS, and DFE, and you've got Treasury lying around as well. It's collaboration. The way we bring artists and scientists together, we need to collaborate. The civil service needs to collaborate with themselves and also with industry. As a nation, we should come together, academia, industry, civil service, and government. There's so many independent silos, all protecting their own little bits, which is good for self-preservation, but not so good for the good of the country. So, you know, I try and spend my life trying to bring people together, because I think working together, all on the same level, we're all different, but we can all work together in a very positive way. So that's my main thing is collaboration. And also give every child in the country a Raspberry Pi. If there's no more questions? Yep.
So, Will James, Cabinet Office. I was just wondering, I mean, we saw like the evolution of video games there, so like the solid state console, and then we've gone more digital and towards apps. And yesterday James Purnell said at the London event that he quoted Wayne Gretzky, I think it is, who said, he doesn't play the puck, he plays where he thinks the puck will be. Where do you think the puck will be after the apps download revolution has happened?
What happens after apps?
Yeah. What's the future of video games? So we've had the consoles.
Yeah.
Solid state.
I think we'll probably move from Xbox to no box. I think you're going to end up with the main screen in the living room being everyone will be fighting for. So the technology will be embedded in smart screens, and it'll be the battle for the living room screen. As the requirement for set-top boxes is going to disappear, it'll be simply software embedded in screens, I would have thought. But I think for a long, long time, smartphones, because it's people on the move, connected to their friends, to global players, that's the popular choice of device, because it suits the incredible speedy way in which we operate today. So you can play anytime, anywhere, with anybody. not being wedded to a physical place.
That's brilliant, Ian. Right, well, are there any more questions? Right, well, thank you very much, Ian. I think we can give you another clap for that. And
Thank you. Thank you very much.